resources and stuff in slides. This one I don't. It's kind of more of a conversation. But if you want the slides, you can put your phone camera up to that QR code, or you can type in the bit.ly link. As I said, I put my Twitter and Instagram handles there. If you want to connect or have conversations, further this conversation, I'm always really happy to talk to people about AAC. So I'm thrilled to connect with anybody. I also put my YouTube channel there because we are talking distance learning, some teletherapy stuff. I have a lot of sort of how-to things on that YouTube channel. So I have my disclosures, which aren't really relevant to this presentation, but in the past I have received honorariums for speaking engagements. I have my full-time salary for my job at Ithaca City School District, and I also have received free trials of apps and therapy products, which I'm not really going to mention many in this session. Non-financial disclosures, I'm an ASHA member. I'm also a member of the ASHA Special Interest Group SIG 12, that's our AAC special interest group, and I'm a member of the Professional Development Committee of SIG 12. So the theme of AAC in the Cloud this year is Beyond the Now, which I just think is like so relevant and applicable to how our school year ended, of just looking beyond this picture. This is my now, or I guess school year ended Friday. But I just felt like this is a picture of me trying to do teletherapy with my toddler. So the end of the school year, after our school buildings closed, it was pretty chaotic. I'm imagining a lot of people feel me there. That I didn't really feel like I was necessarily giving the level of support to my kids that I had been able to do when we were in person. It was really stressful to envision a whole new way of not only supporting my direct caseload of students, but the indirect consult work that I do. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I found myself feeling really frustrated that because when our buildings shut down, it was really only going to be for 3 weeks at first, or maybe a month and a half. And I thought, I'm going to have to learn all these new tools and all these new strategies. Then we're going to go back to school, and I'm going to just like close out all these apps on my computer and go back to using my materials like it had been. But pretty quickly, I realized that I think all of the skills, all of the strategies, and the new tools that I found are things that are really going to improve my practice going into the next school year, whether that's in person, whether it's virtual, whether it's a hybrid. So this presentation is really looking at the things that worked from the past few months and how we can use those either if we're continuing to be virtual or once we go back in person, what from this time, what lessons are we going to use to improve our practice? So for this session, I am really focusing on the positive. I know that not everything was positive. I certainly felt like there were students that I wasn't able to connect with as much as I had wanted to. And I also know, and I really hear the message from families of how difficult it was to just not have that support, the in-person support of school, or even the respite care that they were normally able to have. So I know that that was a huge challenge. So I don't want this presentation to look like, oh, everything was positive, and it was all just like super easy time and we just learned all these great lessons. I think there was totally a balance of like great things that came out of it, as well as things that were huge challenges. So in this presentation, I want to look beyond the now. So, you know, for me, I know the now has kind of wrapped up with my school year, and how are we going to reimagine AAC support when we return to in-person? Of course, anything I'm sharing here will still be relevant and applicable if we're virtual in the fall. So one of the biggest silver linings for me has been this increase in parent and caregiver collaboration, which is something that we know is important. It's supported by research, right? Jill Center and Matt Bod have a lot of great research out there on this topic of training the circle of support, and other communication partners can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, as the direct services that we provide. So I have found that this connection with families has really strengthened in this time. And I've seen a lot of positive things come out of it. So not that it was something that I wasn't doing in the past, but I think that I'm doing it better and have more tools to make it more efficient. So this picture is one of my students. He's 5 years old. He's been using AAC for about 3 years. And so I've worked with him for the last 2 years, and he really is at that emergent level. He's been using he's getting so many one-word phrases that now he's at the point where he's combining them to 2 words. So when we had left school in March, I think he had combined a 2-word phrase, maybe a handful, like 5 times. And now that he's home, and so what I'm doing for him is I had been sending like asynchronous, not face-to-face therapy, but sending activities home for his parents. So the parents reported that they felt a lot more comfortable with the device. They had a much better idea of how they would use it. And I'll talk more about the type of support that I was giving. But his mom, I was looking through our messages to get a picture for this presentation, and there's so many examples of him combining 2-word phrases. He said, read book. He was labeling body parts with his mom. So he said, your eyes. Here he says, eating apple. And this is something he was not doing consistently in school. And now without my direct 4 sessions a week, he's still progressing. And I really think that's because we've just had better collaboration with the family, which has been super, super awesome to see. And so one thing I think that's changed for me is like really thinking about this as two-way communication, which not intentionally, but I think in the past, a lot of my support for families was sort of one way, like sending home, like, here's some core words, here are some suggestions for you. And although I would ask input, what does he like to do at home? I don't think I was getting like a full picture of what my students really liked or really were doing. And now with that particular student, I was in really close contact with the family. I was sending them things throughout the week. They were responding to me, just even like texting pictures of, oh, look at, the pizza shop that we're playing with or something. He's getting really into pretend play. So then when I come back and I make a suggestion, it's so much more relevant to their specific life. It's not just a generic, like our word of the week is go, which there's definitely a place for those things, but I've really challenged myself to make my suggestions for families something that's just integrated into what they're already doing. At first, I was kind of thinking of like homework type things of like, okay, you're going to sit down and you're going to work on your device. But then I thought that's not going to work because they have other kids who are doing their own work. Like families have so much on their plate that it really challenged me to make things simple, streamlined, and easy to implement at home. And so because I kind of changed the approach of how I was approaching it, I saw just really great gains. So I'm in a school setting, and I'm sure this is universal for all settings, but it can be really difficult when we're in-person school to schedule time with family or caregivers. So this was sort of the time sort of opened us up for us in a way that we were doing virtual meetings. It was easy to schedule those on people's time. So how are we going to use virtual platforms to be more flexible with scheduling when we don't have to all be face-to-face and all be sitting around the same table in order to have these discussions and have this collaboration? And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. Of course, with distance learning, a lot of the parents that I work with have been a lot more involved in therapy. They're seeing that live therapy and what it actually looks like, that because I'm in a school setting, they aren't seeing that. And I have done some things, like I use the app Seesaw to send home pictures or videos of things that we're doing in the class, but it's a lot different than seeing that 30-minute session. And I think that seeing like the small discrete skills that we're working on, like say we were working on in and on, and then for them to see their child throughout the session really get more independent with using these target words, it was just nice to have that increased family involvement. And as I said, anecdotally, for the families that I work with, a lot of folks were reporting that they just feel more comfortable, because you think like the hours of the day that they're interacting with the AAC system have increased significantly, which I know that comes with a lot of hardships and a lot of challenges. But this is definitely one positive thing that I have seen in the past few months. So for me, I think that distance learning has really highlighted the benefits of parent-caregiver collaboration. Not that I didn't know it was important, but that I'm like, wow, if I do this right and I do a better job with this collaboration, it's going to have such an impact. But also, I now have tools and skills to improve my past practice. So putting like all these virtual options that we have, I feel like are just going to open up a lot of doors for us to have more support, but not necessarily more time, like smarter support. So we're going to work smarter and provide better supports for families. So here are some tools that I use. When I first made this slide, it was like cluttered with all these different tools, just like a dump of things that you could possibly use. So I pared it back to just things that I use to just sort of tools that I've been using to collaborate. So of course we have our virtual meeting platforms. I use Google Meet, also use Zoom like we're on right now, in order to have that face-to-face live interaction or live conversations with parents. Some tools that I've really liked and gotten better at using are screen recorders for my computer. So we have Screencastify. Here is this arrow, and then the flower one is Loom. They pretty much do the same thing. They're both free tools where you can record up to 5 minutes for free of video. So I'll maybe read a book and model on an AAC system and send that home. And it's just nice because it gives the parents an idea of when you're doing an activity, what type of words would you model? How many words are you saying on the device compared to what you're saying verbally? And I know like on YouTube, there's a lot of SLPs that are reading books and doing modeling, which is awesome. I like to send those home to my families, but I also like to do some of myself, even if they're not as good and not edited as well as some other people's. But I think because our students, I'm sure, miss us, and it's just nice to like see your own face. So for me to get comfortable using these tools and be able to make my own videos, I think has been pretty nice. So then these are the tools that I use to send out those videos. So as I mentioned, my district uses Seesaw for our younger students and Google Classroom for older students. So I really like Seesaw because that's a way, a place to just sort of house all your materials. It sort of ends up being like a social media feed where I can post videos, I can put PDFs in there, I can post links of a YouTube video that I would suggest they watch. And then the family and parents can comment on it. And I can message them and say, of the things I sent last week, what was most helpful? And then I can use that feedback to change what I'm doing the next week. The last one is Wakelet, which is a new tool for me. So I haven't totally curated this one, but Wakelet is a tool where you can curate resources. So it's almost like a Pinterest board, but I'm working on one right now that's like an intro to AAC for parents. So I'm taking YouTube videos, taking like blog posts from Practical AAC and making this nice little sort of curation of resources that I can then share out with families, and I can do them on lots of different topics. So that's something that that I've learned in this time too. So as I mentioned, we're doing these video conferences, which it's so funny to think about that if in January somebody asked me to do a Zoom meeting, that would have definitely been outside of my comfort zone. I would have done it, but like I wouldn't have known how to log on or where the tools were, or like it just might have felt a little bit weird. Now it's not weird. It's totally comfortable. And I obviously can't speak for everyone, but we've had so much practice. And I think parents are having practice too, like they're in their own lives using these video conferencing platforms for their jobs or to connect with family members. And so I can totally imagine when I go back to school, if I'm having a scheduling issue with a parent, I know it can be hard if somebody's working during the day and the school day is the time that I have to meet. Just say, tell me when works. We just need a 15-minute window and we'll hop on a Zoom call. So I think that that's a benefit of us just growing that comfort level with these tools. So like I said, it can alleviate some scheduling issues that might arise. One thing I know I've heard, like I'm talking with tech, they talk about this a bit, of that collaboration between the school SLP and the private practice SLP. And a lot of times those two people might only come together once a year for an IEP meeting. But now, can we invite the private practice SLP into our monthly team meetings once in a while? I can picture this being a lot easier now that we're comfortable with these tools. How I was kind of picturing this at first was like, it's hard for parents to come in, right? But I was in a conversation earlier this week with some other assistive technology consultants, and we're sort of making a planning document for how we're going to collaborate for 3 options in the fall. If we're virtual, if we are totally in person, or if we're dual, like a hybrid, partially in person, partially not. And something that came up was, so for me, I consult, we have 12 different school buildings in my district. So potentially I would go into all 12 of those buildings. But now, we don't know what the guidelines are going to be in the fall. They might not want itinerant people or consulting people to just be popping in all over different buildings. So they might ask me as the consultant, stay in your building and you can Skype in with us. And so another thing that I thought was cool about this was a colleague brought up the point that he feels like he's a lot more effective when he jumps into a meeting that's already scheduled and already happening, and can kind of listen in and see where he can provide assistive tech supports. So this is kind of for more general AT supports, that if you schedule a meeting and just say, what are your assistive technology needs? People don't always know what they don't know. Where if you can hop in to a meeting that's already happening and just listen in, and you might hear some things about, oh, well, he's really having trouble with word prediction because his spelling is so challenging. And then you could kind of hop in with some tools. So I like that idea of being virtual, because I know traveling around to a lot of different buildings, I can't always just make that 10:15 to 10:30 meeting, but picturing doing it virtually seems a lot more doable. So even though we had these tools available to us, I know I personally was not using them frequently, and definitely not to the fullest potential. So that's really something I'm reimagining. And I'm asking myself the question of, how am I going to continue this virtual support to allow me to increase my coaching? And like I said, not necessarily increase the amount of time that I'm spending, but just be more efficient with my time. And I think that sort of doing these smaller, more meaningful meetings or points of collaboration will help us move from that expert model to building a capacity model, and having more people on the team feel more comfortable implementing these tools. So that'll bring us to professional development. Of course, professional development has been accessible on online platforms, and right when our school buildings closed was when I was making my proposal to speak at this online conference. And I just was so thankful for Brian at Cough Drop that he's made this platform available and hosts this conference, because it is accessible to anyone. You know, there's no paywall, there's nothing, you can access it from any time zone. You can watch the recordings anywhere you are geographically. I know there's areas of our country in the world where you don't have an SLP who knows AAC, right? So these virtual conferences are really making the information more broadly available, and just increasing awareness of AAC and provision of evidence-based practice, like presuming competence, early access to AAC. I know that's something that when I started out practicing as an SLP, though I did not know or understand those concepts. So really just getting those messages out to people who don't specialize in AAC, or getting them out to families who need to be advocating for their child. So the other thing that I've been thinking about is this hands-on professional development. So last year I did this really fun session where we didn't have school. It was just a professional development day, so staff only. So I collected every extra iPad I could get my hands on that had an AAC app. I grabbed them from my SLP colleagues, if there was an extra one in a classroom, so that staff could, they just rotated around. I didn't talk or lecture to them at all. They just went to different stations, like had a snack, played a game, did a literacy activity using an AAC device. And it was a big hit. People really liked it. So I was trying to reimagine, well, what's that going to look like? Because I'm not going to be able to get a ton of iPads and like distribute them to people's houses for a professional development session. So one idea I had that I thought would be really effective to kind of replace this is there's a lot of options like emulation software, there's the ability to download free apps, that AAC apps that maybe don't have the voice. So there's also, like, for example, Cough Drop, you can get it in just a browser window, so you can really get that on any device. So part of the professional development for staff could be the first step is get a copy of the system. And of course, it would be supported, and I'll help you figure out how to do that. But if your student's using LAMP Words for Life, then do you have a PC where you can download past software? If you're using Snap Plus Core, do you have an iPad where you can download the free version so you can at least play around with it? If there's no way to get it on a piece of technology, then I will send you a link to download a core board or a printed out version of the system. So then I think this would just be so much more effective, because then the staff will walk away with actually having the system so that they can continue to practice and use it to continue to support their students. Even if it's making like a backup communication book, that's something that would be really valuable for the student to have anyways, and it could be part of this professional development. So that was something I was excited to kind of reimagine that. I haven't done it yet. Maybe it won't work out. We'll report back, but I kind of like that flexibility in thinking. Okay, here's another thing about PD is the 30-minute professional development session, I think, is really a sweet spot and has been something that's just sort of like opened up during this time of virtual professional development. So a lot of times, and when I was speaking in this group with colleagues at the beginning of the week, they were saying that a lot of times staff will get like a half day to do PD with you, right? Or to do some training. So they're like, well, I have a half day sub, so we might as well try to pack in like 2 or 3 hours of professional development. And that can be exhausting. I mean, that's great, but it can, sometimes you might lose engagement, where I think I've done a couple 30-minute sessions recently, and it really makes me pare down my information, give only what I think is most valuable. Like, I could talk about AAC, I could talk about core words for hours. Do I need to? Is that going to be valuable for the people that I'm trying to reach? Maybe yes, maybe no. You are all stuck with me for an hour today, but I do think keeping in mind those shorter sessions, that if we're doing them virtually, could we just meet really quickly after school or meet up on your lunch break? Just be a little bit more flexible than everybody getting together in the same room. I do think that's beneficial. I cannot wait to be in the same room with my colleagues and do a session, but this is just sort of another thing to consider. More about professional development. I know that I talk about AAC Basics a lot. I have a slide deck that I kind of tweak as I go into the next session, but I go into all my different schools. When we have a student or a team that's new to AAC, I pull up my slides and I go over the same thing. And although that's great and it's nice, especially if the family is able to come, then it might be an opportunity for me to meet the family. But this is also something that I could just one time record it. And then because there's always somebody from the team who can't come, who has to leave early or has to get their kids after school or something. And so I could say, like, whoever is able to come live, let's do it live. If you can't, then here's a recording of the session. That would be something that I think is super easy to do, and I haven't done that. So along those lines, asynchronous training modules. So I really like the idea of shorter video content that people can consume at their own pace. So would I make a training module all about aided language input? So there'd be video 1, start here, and maybe it's just a series of 10-minute videos that could be great for paraprofessionals to watch, to send home to families, and just to be able to do it on your own time, I think is going to give us a lot of bang for our buck, because of course I was in a session about training paraprofessionals yesterday, and we were talking about how do you make the time for staff to be released to have training. So I think these shorter chunks that people can do on their own is a good idea. Another thing I've done a lot lately is how-to videos. So when you're on an AAC system, parents are asking me like, okay, I want to add the word FaceTime because we've been FaceTiming our families a lot. How do you do that? So I am making just screencasts of my iPad. I have put a bunch of those specifically for Lamp Words for Life on my YouTube channel of like how to add a word, how to change the pronunciation. And they're all like maybe minute-long videos. And for me, I'm visual. That's way easier to follow than if somebody describes for me. Or when our kids were coming to school, a parent might say to me, can you add this word? And I would just do it. Where now this has really built capacity of somebody else being able to, like, the family's comfortable going in and editing something or adding the name of somebody in their family who I didn't know of at first. So I think that's been really great. And I really like doing those videos. Also, another thing that I said I had done before, but I would really like to do more of, is taking videos of my students in therapy or in class. And I had put those on Seesaw before, which I could totally see doing that. Of course, you could put it in a Google Drive, you could put it in Dropbox or email videos, but just having parents be able to see what you mean, like when you say modeling, or what words are we really talking about when we say core words. I've heard this feedback a bit from families where I've given them sort of lecture type trainings on AAC best practices, but they still are like, I don't really know how I would implement that when I'm at home. I recently listened to a Talking with Tech episode with Caitlin Calder, who's a mom of an AAC user and also an SLP. It was awesome. It was really eye-opening to hear her perspective. And she shared that she was like, I was listening to what they were telling me, and I felt like I understood it at the time, but then I would go home, didn't feel like I could implement it. And something that really changed it for her was being able to watch sessions with her daughter. And so, of course, in private practice, that might be a little bit more doable, where in school, we're not usually doing that or having time for that. So to make videos and to show, like, not just a video from YouTube of this is what shared book reading looks like, but really like this is what your child is doing, I think is really valuable. Okay. So this is actual video footage of me in an IEP meeting trying to decide how much of my therapy I'm recommending to be direct and how much is indirect, because of course it's a balance and it's a really hard decision. This is something I've been thinking a lot about, and I still don't know if I'm getting it right. So I'd love feedback on this of how you all are balancing your IEP minutes, because it's challenging. It's challenging for me, at least. Okay, so a traditional model, at least from what I've seen, is more of that direct therapy. So we're doing a direct, billable 30-minute session, right? And this is effective. We know that, especially when we're targeting discrete skills or novel skills, this is great. We're getting a lot of targeted practice. We know that's so important to get a lot of targets will help gain independence more quickly. However, this also begs the question about generalization or carryover. So even if you're doing it in their natural environment, if you're in the classroom doing this direct 30-minute session, that's awesome. But then when you leave, are those strategies being implemented through the rest of the day? And I know a lot of times because of scheduling, and like I totally get this, that sometimes when I come in to work with a student, that's when the aide is able to take a break. So I understand that makes sense, but it also means that they're not getting some of that training. So I have some ideas for that, maybe adding some indirect. And so I've seen that with distance learning, there's been this temporary shift from direct therapy to indirect. So I know I'm not providing the same amount of direct minutes to my kids, but I've also been supplementing the support of sending things home to parents. So I'm always putting stuff on Seesaw, things that are specific to their goals for my AAC users and my non-AAC users. And like I said, I've seen that be such a huge benefit of having more of that indirect time with families is really paying off and has been really beneficial. So is this something that is temporary? Is it something that we're gonna just go back to our previous model or not? Will we update how we're looking at things and how we're writing IEPs? I think now is the perfect time to consider the effectiveness of this indirect support. And like I'm talking about all these tech tools, we can create training modules and do all these things that can be this really nice indirect support for our students to train the paraprofessionals, to as me as the SLP. I would love to share this with OTs and PTs. I'm so lucky to work with other awesome related service providers who really want to do teaming and want to learn about AAC systems. But the reality is there's not always the time. And if me and the OT are both doing direct, at least in New York State, we can't both bill. So we can't co-treat technically. So it just, if one of us has indirect time, then it just opens up. I'm going to talk about more of my ideas of what indirect might look like. But again, building capacity and helping to build independence for AAC users, if we're really making sure we're using best practices, following least to most prompting, all of those things that we as AAC people probably talk about a lot, but is not necessarily coming across the radar of everybody else on the team. Another thing I'll just quickly mention, I don't have a lot of insight here, but 3-1 model for service delivery is something that we're exploring in our district, which would look like 3 weeks of direct service and then 1 week of indirect service. And so this is something that's supported by ASHA, and we've seen tons of benefits from our pilot program of being able to do more makeups. So the direct services are really still happening, but also student observation, it just gives a lot more flexibility for that indirect week, when I think we can have such a big impact on the circle of support. If we can support the people that are with our students all day long, it's just going to be to the benefit of the student. And I know that sometimes when this topic comes up, I think sometimes people feel a little like defensive of their direct time, like, no, this is still important. And I totally agree. I think we need direct services, but I also think that we can be flexible in thinking about this balance. And also for me, when I've brought this up in IEP meetings, like maybe let's switch one of those direct sessions to indirect. I know this is me in my own head. No one said this to me, but I feel like I'm doing less. Like I'm doing less support because I'm saying that I'm backing off a little bit for this 130 minutes. So I think if you feel like that, then it's important to talk about it with your team before the IEP meeting, talk about it with administrators. When we've talked about this 3-1 model, we've brought it to admin, we've talked about it in our SLP meetings, so that we're really supporting each other and feeling like, no, the indirect support is really important and really valuable. It's not less, it's just, I think, working smarter, and really building capacity and decreasing the reliance on me as an expert, putting that in quotes. I don't feel like an expert, but I don't want to be the one person that people look to say, how do we program the device or things like that. So I think I kind of already covered this of just imagining the possibilities of building the circle of support and using these indirect strategies that we're doing now. I know I've gotten so much better at just being smart and thoughtful about the things that I'm sending home to parents, and being careful about what resources I'm sending to them. I'm not sending home like 50-minute videos necessarily to parents, but short things that they can consume at their own time, and just being thoughtful about how we're going to continue to use that. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some of my ideas of what indirect AAC support might look like. Kind of put it in 3 categories. So one is sort of that teaming, making time to co-plan with teachers. If we can create lessons together, this is one of my favorite things. I really love doing this. I love being involved in curriculum, and we don't always have time for that. So if that's an indirect thing that you put on the IEP, then there will be time for you to meet with a teacher during their planning time and just say, talk about the descriptive teaching model and say, okay, I see these are your vocab words for this upcoming unit. How can we talk about those concepts using this student's AAC system? Is something that has just been really awesome to be able to do. Again, can this time be used to meet with families? I've mentioned that I think meeting with families and collaborating with them is really important. I know I have a million times. So just learning more about home culture, what's important to you, what words want to be on the device, what type of sentence structure do we need to have available on the device, and really just getting that information. I know, again, I'm going to reference another Talking with Tech episode, but Kara Walton is an SLP who was on, I think, just last week, talking about anti-racism and the need to really diversify different things in the AAC world. And one thing that she said that I've really been thinking about is the ability to use dialect like African American English on a AAC system. So that's something that we really need to get, at least I would need to get home support for what sentence structures, what language, how do you want things to be said that are not things I might think of on my own. I hadn't thought of that until I heard that episode with Kara. So again, for me, it just highlights that need to really be building relationships with families. Again, indirect time would help us coach paraprofessionals and do job embedded professional development. So again, we always hear that there's not time for doing the teaming that we really want to do and that we know is so valuable. So job embedded PD would look like me as the consult, having that indirect time. So I have time in my schedule, but the paraprofessional is just doing their job with the student, and I'm coming in and coaching them as they're doing their job. So I'm not having them leave the classroom or take a break or stay after school, but we're really just building that coaching in to what's already happening in the day, which I think is a good use of time and actually a way more functional way to do training. Because if I sit here and lecture to them, yes, you're going to understand it, but it's just not really going to sink in, I feel like, as much until you see it in action. So another thing that could be done during indirect support is observing students across the day. So a lot of times when we're doing that direct support, like we're leading the activity, it's kind of our speech time, but we're not seeing how our student independently navigates their environment, what kind of words they're using, what does it look like in the cafeteria, what does it look like outside, which, you know, being on the playground, I've done that before for direct therapy sessions. It can be fun. Sometimes it's not the most functional time for me to be targeting language, but I still want to see what they're doing on the playground and like, oh, so they're not carrying their AAC device around. What kind of supports do we need to put into the playground? So again, these are things that I don't think maybe the teacher isn't necessarily thinking of, but if we can get in there, check out how things look, we can provide some of that support. We can also facilitate peer support, which is one of something that I'm really passionate about and love doing. I think it is invaluable to get peers comfortable and using AAC for a variety of reasons. In my pre-K, when we do universal access to AAC, we find students who benefit from it that we might not have thought to do an AAC eval with. It just becomes a much more normalized part of the classroom. This is something that's really, really important to me. But if I'm sort of facilitating something with a peer, that doesn't make sense for that's direct hours for my student, right? So this would fit into indirect. Another idea I had was, would I go into the classroom and cover a break? So think back to the training modules I haven't made yet, but will over the summer. Could I, if I have somebody that I really want to check out these aided language input modules, I could go and cover a break for an aide, which I think just kind of like builds goodwill in the classroom and shows that you're willing to get in there and help out when it's needed. And then you also free up some time for somebody to do some training. So I can be with the student, they can be doing the training, rather than if we're doing it face-to-face, we both have to be out of the room. That's like double the time, right? So I thought that could be a creative way and something that people might like. And I was picturing, like, you don't have to watch the modules during that time. You could just go take a break, do whatever you want. And then when you're at home, whatever's convenient for you, it just kind of gives you that extra breathing room to be able to do some of those introductory trainings. Another thing we could do with indirect time is, of course, programming, planning for our students, making some of those screencastify videos, making those little how-to videos. Like I have a Google Drive. Now I've put the videos on YouTube, but I have a Google Drive where anytime somebody asks me a question like, oh, on cough drop, how do I change what the picture looks like? So I'll get on my iPad and do a little video and put it in the drive. So then the next time somebody asks me that question, I can just refer them there. We already talked about training videos, and I just feel like this indirect time, all of these suggestions that I'm giving are really leading us more towards a capacity model, not an expert model, so that everybody, this whole circle of support, the whole team is comfortable implementing these strategies, and that I'm, like I said, not the one person that just has all this knowledge and I'll come to your school and like give it to you and then leave. Another cool idea that came up in this conversation I was in at the beginning of the week was, if we're not allowed to go into every building that we normally support, would we have a point person? So would it be the SLP in that building? Would it be the reading teacher, the OT, or the librarian, tech specialist that can be our point person that will let us know if they have questions, but that we can sort of go through of, hey, this device needs to be reprogrammed. Can I show you how to do it really quickly and you do it for me? And then wouldn't that be a really cool way to build capacity, to just build up the skills of one person in each building that could then continue to build up the skills of the other people? But I just thought that was a creative idea. And something that, again, we could have been doing this all along, but I didn't think about that until now. Okay. Wrapping up a little bit. So if you've heard me present before, you're probably going to know that inclusion is going to come up. So this is another one of my passions, that in our district, we really have almost all of our AAC users are included in the general ed classroom, which I think is amazing, but it's not easy. It's not something I learned in school. It's not something that there's a manual for. So it's challenging and it's messy. In person, what does that look like on a digital platform? So I have not answered this question. I'm thinking about it. Maybe you all can help me too. But I think that it's really challenging us to look at how authentically our students are being included. So when you're in a Zoom meeting, you have all your students there, who's participating, who's able to give a response and who's not. And it really highlights this, that we already knew, but I'm looking at it through a different lens in this virtual classroom space, that it's not enough to just be there. It's not enough for a student to just be on the other side of the camera and have like their face in the Zoom meeting. Is everyone able to participate? Are we being mindful to create the space where everyone is able to and comfortable to participate? So if you don't want to participate, that's okay. But I really want to make sure that everyone has the ability to, and then everyone feels like they're able to and that they're going to be heard. Because also, I know time is an issue that we've kind of problem solved. I know at least one classroom that it can take a longer time for an AAC user to generate a message. And we really need to make sure that that time is happening, that we're accounting for that time. And something that I've really liked about thinking about this inclusion in a digital space is reinforcing that idea of giving multiple ways to show what you know. So I did a professional development, a short 30-minute one, which I really liked, with a colleague for my district. And we talked about making an inclusive morning meeting. And so some things were to give everyone the option, all the students, to react with the emojis. So we have that like in our Google Meet, where you can do a thumbs up, thumbs down. So the teacher could ask a question and just say, okay, everybody respond with emojis. Or doing asynchronous things like Flipgrid is a tool where me as the teacher, I could post a question and just say, what's something cool that you learned in class this week? And then asynchronously, so not live face-to-face, just on their own, students can make a video to send back. On Seesaw, you can respond with a video, you can respond with typing, you can respond with a drawing, you can respond by taking a picture. So that's really cool. I was able to check out a special ed colleague of mine that he had posted this prompt about like how flowers grow and what they need and parts of a flower. And he showed me all the different ways his students responded. So somebody took a picture of a flower and typed in labels. Somebody drew a flower within the app. Somebody typed out like bullets of answering the question. So again, this is just general best practice, right? But this flip to only being digital, I think, has highlighted just more tools and really thinking about this stuff more. Oops. on keyboard. So kind of a continuation of this and looking at some general assistive technology things. If we look at assistive technology versus universal design for learning. So universal design for learning is that we're designing our classroom with the tools and flexibility to support all the learners. Assistive technology is something that's going to be written into a student's IEP. It specifically addresses a disability. So I know I've talked about like making AT UDL. So looking at these assistive technology strategies that work for support our students who have disabilities and making it universal so that everybody has access to that. And I've been a part of conversations where it's important to keep these two things separate because assistive technology, that is a need on an IEP to support a disability. And so we don't want to say it's just universally designed. We want to make sure that that's always available for that student and that it's really thoughtfully planned out to support the student's specific disability. But that doesn't mean that we can't universally design those tools when it's appropriate. So we know that a lot of the tech that we all use, like voice to text that I do on my cell phone, was created for people with disabilities, and then it became a universal design, and we all have access to that on our phones, and we all can use it. So I really think that when we plan for the students with the most significant needs, like I've talked about, that morning meeting, if we are confident in making sure that the student who has needs the most support can answer and participate, then we're good. Then everybody's going to be able to participate, right? And it's going to make everybody benefit. So I just really like this quote that for people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disabilities, it makes it possible. Okay, I know I'm running low on time a little bit here, but I love that quote just because I think it highlights that just also something like really unique and powerful that our students with disabilities can bring into the classroom and just make our classroom environment so much better because they're there. Is one thing that I really think is embodied by what inclusion is. Okay, last couple slides. So really quick, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because this is something I haven't really figured out, but that I've really been having conversations and thinking about. That how does our prompt hierarchy look different when we're doing teletherapy? Somebody shared, I can't remember who it was, about feeling that their students, they were really seeing what their student was able to do independently because they weren't there to provide all of these prompts. So I love this prompt hierarchy by Kate Ahern because I like the umbrella that we're always providing aided language input, and I like that she took out physical prompts. So this is something I definitely follow, but I also feel when I have my mind really on this prompt hierarchy, I have my mind on a target. Like, okay, our target word is go, I'm modeling go, I'm pointing to go, and I'm directing the language and directing the activity, and it's not really generative, spontaneous language, right? So I'm reminded of this quote by Erin Sheldon that I love, that it's only communication if we're being told something we do not already know. So I know this prompt hierarchy has a place. We need to teach the location of words, what they mean. We need to pair meanings with words and fun, functional activities. But it just reminds me that there has to be a time where I step back and really just let them say whatever they want to say. When I'm on the other side of a screen, I don't really have a choice, right? They are going to be independently saying what they want. But just thinking about kind of like inserting some arrows in here or something of like, when do you prompt the parent to then, or the support person to then prompt your AAC user if you're in teletherapy? And so this is something I'm thinking about when we have a screen in between us, but I've also really thought like, wow, would I reimagine this when we get back in person of how am I really planning for independence? So it's just something I had some quick thoughts on, and I'm going to close with this, that how has this experience made us better clinicians? Or there's people out there watching who aren't clinicians, just better support, better communication partners. And like I said, I know it hasn't been rainbows and butterflies this whole time, but I think there have really been some pockets of positivity. How are we going to pivot what we're doing to support AAC users when we transition back to AAC learning? I really want to be mindful about what are we going to let go of and what are we going to hold on to so that our AAC support looks different. You know, we have to evolve and we have to learn from these hardships and challenges that we've gone through. So let's really be mindful of the tools that we're comfortable with, the strategies that we've used, what has actually helped and what's worked, and how are we going to continue that even when we're no longer digital. So thank you so much. I'm not going to have time for questions, I don't think, so I'm going to wrap up, but then I'm going to jump right into Slack and answer the questions on there. If you want to reach out to me, again, here's my social media stuff. I didn't have my email in the first slide. Feel free to email me. One last chance to get the slides. And of course, if you didn't get them for some reason, I can send them to you.
All right. I want to thank Sarah. That was great and definitely something needed. As she mentioned, feel free to continue to type in your questions and things in Slack. And she'll go through and answer those. And definitely, I've checked. I haven't checked out all of her YouTube videos yet, but I've checked out quite a few, and they are pretty impressive. So feel free to reach out to Sarah as well. Thanks, Sarah. We appreciate your time.